Okay, Peter, you got this, you got this.
What the hell are you wearing?
It's my suit.
Where's the case?
Okay, that's not my... What? I thought that was a closet. This is still my room.
My Peter gave me a sense of belonging when no one else would. From the diaphragm, yeah!
I think she might be.
Mrs. Stark! Oh my god! Holy cow! You will not believe what's been going on.
Most comic book readers, and especially fans of Marvel and the Hulk specifically, know of the storyline where the Illuminati banished the Hulk from Earth to send him to another planet. He ended up crash landing on Sakaar and becoming a gladiator turned liberator turned ruler of the planet until his ship self-destructed, taking out his family and bringing him back to Earth with a vengeance that no guilty person was safe from. What if Planet Hulk ends up asking the question, what if the Illuminati's banishment had hit its original target? In this story, Hulk lands on an incredibly peaceful and serene planet instead of Sakaar. And sure, he goes a bit ragey at first, but he eventually realizes the planet is inhabited by a race of peaceful creatures. Over long periods of time, the Hulk helps this race to evolve and become a thriving civilization. They end up viewing the Hulk as their god, and he basically acts as one that leads them to wealth and prosperity. It's one of the few Hulk stories that doesn't end in tears, and I'm more than happy to talk about it for that reason alone. So, what happens if you take Logan Howlett and Bruce Wayne and just mash them up together? You subtract Robins, add some Canada, carry the two, and you'll find you get Logan Wayne. This awesome character is from the amalgam universe of Earth 9602. Now obviously, Bruce Wayne has no actual powers of his own unless you count his undeniable skill. So most of the abilities belonging to Logan Wayne come from his Wolverine half. A massively powerful regenerative healing factor, slowed aging, superhuman senses, plus his healing factor and adamantium skeleton allow him to have a degree of super strength. But thanks to his Wayne half of things, Dark Claw is a master detective and master of martial arts, stealth, acrobatics, and intimidation. After he witnessed the passing of his parents, Logan went to live with his uncle up in Alberta, Canada, who then also lost his life to poachers. So yes, it's still as dark as both Bruce and Logan's backstories. He then went to kick it with some nuns and then joined up with the Canadian Air Force. At some point, he joined the Weapon X program and learned of his mutation and gained his claws alongside his incredibly dangerous rival, Creed H. Quinn, who would become a saber-toothed Joker hybrid named Hyena. Logan Wayne would go back to New Gotham City where he decided to avenge his parents' and uncle's deaths by donning the costume and name of Dark Claw. If you like this list so far, make sure to drop a like and to check out part 1 where we covered 10 more awesome Marvel variants better than the originals. Number 8, Earth Askani Apocalypse. As some of you may know, Apocalypse and the mutant Nathan Summers, aka Cable, have a lot of history together. When Nathan was a freshly born little bean, he was infected with the techno-organic virus by Apocalypse as a test of his worthiness to become a host for Apocalypse. When the X-Men fought off Apocalypse and recovered Nathan, Cyclops begrudgingly agreed to send Nathan away to the future with the hope of him being cured. Earth 4932, or Earth Askani, is that future. Taking place in the late 36th century, where Apocalypse ruled the entire Earth, when Nathan arrived, he was immediately cloned just in case he could not be saved. When this Apocalypse found out that Nathan was in the present, he sent out his forces to capture Nathan, but he had actually taken the clone instead. That clone would be raised up by Apocalypse with the hopes of him becoming the next host body for Apocalypse himself. Apocalypse named this clone Strife after a villain who fought him in the modern day, who was actually an adult Strife, which really confuses things, doesn't it? Since his current body had grown old and feeble, Apocalypse raised Strife to be extremely powerful as he planned to transfer his consciousness and power into Strife's body. Now, the real Nathan, who was being raised to be Cable by Jean Grey and Cyclops in this future world, ended up disrupting Apocalypse's plan, with the teenage Cable defeating this old and decrepit Apocalypse in combat. Number 7, Netflix Punisher. We have had 3 movies of debatable quality that have brought Frank Castle, the Punisher, to the screen. And while Ray Stevenson, rest in peace, and Thomas Jane, and I guess Dolph Lundgren did decent jobs as Frank Castle, when Jon Bernthal showed up as the Punisher in the second season of Netflix's acclaimed Daredevil show, he did it better than anyone before him. Or at least for me, he did. It was the most believable version of the Punisher I had ever seen. Bernthal brought fury and intensity at all times, almost to the point of seeming positively insane, especially when compared with the morals of Matt Murdock, Daredevil. His character was also incredibly capable and brutal, as is necessary for the Punisher to even work in real life. When he got his own show in 2017, it brought everything to just a whole different level, telling a conspiracy story that also took a very interesting and pretty real look at PTSD in soldiers, while also bringing the right amount of brutality that you'd expect from a Punisher story. Even my mom liked this show, and she doesn't even read comics. That's the highest praise I know how to give. Number 6, Wagnerine. The Legion of Night comes from a world where Mr. Sinister corrupted the genomes of those who underwent the mutant resurrection protocols on Krakoa. Because of this, Sinister's control over humanity and mutantdom became supreme. One of his experiments was combining the genetics of different mutants to create powerful chimeras to serve him, and it made for some crazy awesome comic book moments. A particularly special project was turning the genes of Nightcrawler into a band of teleporting assassins. But the Legion of Night, while having leadership in the form of Sinister's female clone, Mother Righteous, also had field leaders. One of which was the mutant Banshee possessed by the spirit of variance called Vox Ignis, and the other was Mr. Sinister's favorite Nightcrawler chimera, Wagnerine. Mixing the DNA of both Nightcrawler and Wolverine, Wagnerine, funnily enough, was more of a mix of Laura Kinney, X-23, and Nightcrawler, and she made for an excellent assassin and leader for Mother Righteous once she had been freed from the control of Mr. Sinister. Wagnerine ended up beating the odds and procreated with the Cyclops Nightcrawler, aka Summer Night, to create a golden mutant teleporter who seemingly teleported to a random location immediately after her birth, causing Summer Night to lose control of himself and fall victim to the influence of Sinister once again. Eventually, it was revealed that Mother Righteous had actually taken the child, and when that was revealed to Wagnerine, she defected. Now 900 years later, she was finally able to bring down Mother Righteous and go on to try and live a life with her golden little baby. Number 5, Ultimate Spider-Man. The Ultimate Spider-Man comic run is considered by a lot of people to be one of the absolute best Spider-Man runs ever. Being one of the best things to come from writer Brian Michael Bendis, Ultimate Spider-Man revamped the origin of the Spider-Man character for modern audiences in the 2000s, but also made Peter Parker even younger. The story follows the original story pretty closely, with only minor tweaks and changes that make it even better, like the fixes made to the Clone Saga story, or even the changes made to the Venom symbiote. The Earth 1610 comic book run had one writer at the helm, which really helped to maintain consistency throughout the story, whereas Earth 616's Amazing Spider-Man carried on for 50 years and had many writers coming in to build the story, unfortunately giving it areas that kind of lacked to some degree. Ultimate Spider-Man took a great idea and then ran with it, building up an incredible cast of characters and injecting a great deal of emotion and heart into the story as it took familiar ideas in crazy new directions. Number 4, Ultimate Loki. Loki Laufey-san in the main Marvel universe is a pretty dastardly devil. He's always got schemes on schemes and is just doing what gods of mischief best, using his sorcery. But he's also somewhat redeemable. The Loki Odinson of Marvel's Ultimate Universe, however, is kind of just a madman, but one with the ability to warp reality. He could retcon history into anything he desired by either creating events that never happened or erasing events as if they never happened. He could create copies of himself, change the color of the skies, render himself near impervious to harm, even from Thor's hammer, and summon armies of monsters. One of the first things this Loki does while a member of the Warriors 3 alongside Thor and their brother Balder is visit his giantess mother, steal the Norn stones, and completely take the life of his brother Balder. He then took on the guise of Baron Zemo during World War II and led an attack on Asgard with frost giants and some super soldier Germans that he created. This got him banished to the room without doors, just like he planned. He was eventually freed from the room, and unlike his brothers who had been reborn as mortal men, Loki was still a god, and an incredibly powerful one. He would be one of the main threats faced by the Ultimates when they formed up, but was eventually depowered by Odin. Number 3, Spider-Man 2099. Instead of getting bitten by a radioactive super spider, Miguel O'Hara's DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA to save his life after he was forcibly hooked on a not far off future substance by his own employer. If that sounds convoluted, well, yeah, but it also sounds right at home in a comic book. Although the process of gaining his powers differed from Peter Parker, Miguel was still granted many of the same abilities at a pretty similar level. One thing that differs largely is Miguel's spider sense. He doesn't have one. Instead, Miguel has advanced super senses similar to someone like Daredevil or Wolverine. Miguel also has some abilities that are just wholly unique to him. For example, he possesses an incredible level of super speed as well as telepathic communication abilities, both of which are really freaking cool. He also has fangs and claws on his fingers and toes that he can use in combat. On top of all those powers though, Miguel is from the year 2099, which means that he naturally has a much more advanced set of technology at his disposal. But it's not just his powers that make him better. The Spider-Man 2099 story is awesome, but you'll have to do the reading to figure that out for yourself. Number 2, Tony Stark, Sorcerer Supreme. In all new X-Men Annual Number 1 from 2014, Marvel gave us a version of Tony Stark Iron Man from the temporary reality number of 591. Tony in this reality successfully brought together the Avengers to permanently end the threat of Thanos on the universe. Because of the Avengers accomplishing that insane feat of strength and saving the entire universe from the threat of Thanos, alien races of said universe rewarded the Earth and its heroes with advanced alien technology, allowing the Earth to become a utopia. Tony himself would start to lean more into his mystical side with all the extra time he had after saving the universe, eventually becoming the Sorcerer Supreme and being able to solve further conflicts without needing to do any kind of real fighting. Last I heard, this Tony was living youthfully comfortable at 126 years old. This isn't the only Tony to become the Sorcerer Supreme, but he is certainly one of the most accomplished. Number 1, Earth X Venom. In the alternate future of Earth 999, basically every single person has powers. Things have gone apocalyptic, and in an act of vengeance, the Venom symbiote bonded to the daughter of Peter Parker, May Parker. While her retired and cynical pops ain't too thrilled about it, May does actually have complete control over the symbiote thanks to her advanced and honed spider sense, which was something the symbiote was never expecting to happen. Venom and her father Spider-Man go on to join the superpowered police force and fight crime and supervillain threats together. She eventually, after the death of Death itself, goes on to be recruited by Kang the Conqueror as part of a multiversal team to fight the Apocalypse twins. In addition to her proportional spider powers, plus the enhanced spider sense, she gains all the usual symbiote powers plus a few extra, like what seems to be a rudimentary form of telepathy, and it is believed her symbiote could go on to mutate further to gain even more powers, which is a good way for Marvel to say, we can do whatever we want with this character. She's one of the coolest looking versions of Venom while also being one of the most capable. Kicking off the list today at number 10 is Lord Iron. Kicking off the list with Marvel 1602, otherwise known as Earth 311. This Earth takes a bunch of the Marvel characters we love and plops them in the Elizabethan era, and yes, that includes Iron Man. Going by the name Anthony Stark, aka Lord Iron, his armor is powered by quote-unquote lightning bottles, and was created when Anthony was captured in the Holy Land during the English-Spanish Wars and treated rather harshly by the Hulk, resulting in the requirement of the suit just to survive. Anthony is sent on a mission to hunt down Banner in the New World with his technologically advanced suit. Now, look, this suit in comparison to other versions of Iron Man is not the most advanced and powerful suit, and you'd expect that from the time period. But when looked at with the scope of the technology at the time, it's centuries ahead of its time, being nearly on par with the base Iron Man armors, only it has a super sweet lightning sword. Oh yeah! Number 9, Iron Man 2099. In the dark, ultra-capitalist dystopian society of Marvel 2099, Tony Stark is physically long gone. Instead, it's a guy by the name of Sonny Frisco who takes on the mantle of Iron Man. The technology behind Sonny's advanced suit of armor is a full century ahead of Tony Stark's tech, but despite that, the basic range of powers and abilities are curiously the same. Iron Man 2099 flies around at supersonic speeds and generates powerful energy blasts. Plus, he has a metric butt-ton of firepower and gadgets. What I think makes Sonny Frisco better is that the character actually actually has an advanced intellect comparable to Tony Stark's, or even better with the knowledge of this future world. Sonny built the suit of armor himself, as any Iron Man worth his salt should, and he earned his place on the Avengers team of 2099 in the process. If you guys have your own favorite alternate Iron Man variants that don't make this list, or you just have ideas for future videos, don't be shy and make sure to drop them down in the comments below. We love to hear from you guys whenever we can. But moving on to number 8, Exiles. Tony Stark, the undisputed monarch of Earth. What? Yes. You take a man with the intelligence, wealth, and power of Anthony Stark and make him unbothered by any kind of sense of morality, and that's a man who can bring the world to its knees. But he also has the sense to not let them know it, and then be begged to take charge. Tony Stark of Earth 42777 acquired every world conglomerate, he organized a mutant war against humanity, and then defeated their leader, Magneto. He created a worldwide famine, the likes of which was never seen before, and then he invented the cures and vaccines to fix it. He then got elected president. He developed weather controlling technologies to create biblical level natural disasters in Europe and Asia, having them beg for help to the point of giving up their own control. Central America and Canada had economic down spirals that brought them into the fold as well, and he made a deal with Dr. Doom, who had attacked the Capitol and taken out all the other Democratic leaders in America. And then he destroyed Doom after receiving a blast to the face that left him disfigured, just like Emperor Palpatine. He's de-lifed the Hulk. This version of Tony Stark is ruthless and powerful, and that is why he's on this list. Number 7, Ultimate Universe Iron Man. Having your mind and body altered by an Infinity Gem sounds like it could go anywhere, but fittingly for Tony Stark, it led to him being able to physically and mentally interact with pretty much any computer ever. And that's a pretty good ability for someone who flies around in a technological suit of armor. The Antonio Stark of Earth 1610, or the Ultimate Universe, has basically become part man, part machine. Kinda like Cyborg, but not really. Being able to project his mind into computers and androids, allowing him to be nigh unkillable, proven when the Master, aka Reed Richards, of this universe seemingly brought his demise, but he became a non-physical entity which could manifest itself via computer systems. When actually physically inhabiting an Iron Man armor, he gains the usual abilities, plus force fields and cloaking, but he's also got nanites in his bloodstream that he uses to control his suits, as well as open locks, defuse little boom booms, and interact with all forms of technology before he gets infused with an Infinity Gem and becomes super cool. Number 6, Iron Hammer. The Iron Man from the 2018 comic book event Infinity Warps blended the characters of Iron Man and Thor to make for one of the most powerful versions of Tony Stark ever. For some backstory, this warp world was created when Gamora gained the power of the Infinity Stones, and she used them to fold the universe in half, merging souls together, creating amalgamated heroes like Stark Odinson. This awesome version of Iron Man and Thor enjoys virtual immortality thanks to his Asgardian physiology, along with superhuman strength and endurance. His hammer, Mjolnir Iron, I know, stupid name, just go with it, has all the same powers as the regular Mjolnir, but it also grants Stark his armor, which is now a mystical suit of Asgardian armor that does all the same cool things. Since both Thor and Tony kind of had daddy issues, this version of the mix also has their father, Howard Odin, playing a big part in the story too. It's just really awesome. Okay. Number 5, Iron Maniac. Coming at us from the alternate Earth of 5012, the Iron Maniac shows readers what a totally evil version of Tony Stark would look like, other than the Exiles version. That one's also really evil. This Tony Stark from this war-torn version of the Marvel Universe has done some truly horrible things following the loss of so many of his fellow heroes at the hands of a villain named Titanus. Using a really cool armor that also somewhat resembles Dr. Doom's armor, the Iron Maniac went against the Fantastic Four and even took the life of Johnny Blaze in his native universe. His advanced armor repels some magical attacks, as well as generates a neural dampening field that mitigates telepathic and telekinetic attacks to some degree, which really helped him out to be absolutely terrible. Reed Richards of Earth 5012 eventually found a way to send this Tony Stark to the 616 universe, where he faced the 616 Fantastic Four and eventually the New Avengers, showing just how powerful this evil Iron Man actually is, and making us thank our stars that normal Tony Stark Stark is a good guy. Number 4, Iron Lantern. The Amalgam Universe combined the world's two biggest comic book companies, DC and Marvel Comics, during a time of utmost peace and prosperity. Just kidding, this was in the 90s. This crazy event pitted popular characters from both sides against each other and even fused some characters together. One incredibly cool amalgamation would be between Iron Man and Green Lantern. Harold Stark, HAL for short, was the founder of Stark Aircraft, and while test flying a prototype aircraft, it suddenly took off on its own to a crashed alien spaceship, and it crashed itself yards away. The crash left shards of metal in Stark's chest, which after meeting the dying alien, Roman Sur, Stark survived using an alien battery that suspiciously was in the shape of a lantern to build a suit of armor. This armor not only kept him alive though, it gave him the ability to create green solid energy constructs, fire plasma bolts, fly at speeds beyond the speed of light, time travel, and it granted him almost unlimited telepathic powers. He also had translation of virtually any language, force field generation, and the ever classic superhuman strength and durability. Yeah, he'll put his hand on your chest, like this. He'll go, stop. And then he'll fire a little repulsor beam out. Number 3, Iron Man and Doctor Strange. So it turns out that Tony Stark is a good fit to become the Sorcerer Supreme, and honestly, when you think about the intelligence of the guy, it makes a decent amount of sense. In What If issue number 113 from 1998, Tony Stark and Stephen Strange meet at a party, and after leaving together, Tony is the one driving when they get into the car crash that would normally ruin Strange's hands. Where in the normal continuity, Stephen has to deal with his hands relatively alone, in this What If, it leads Tony on a journey fueled by guilt to try and repair Strange's hands. Eventually, it leads him to the Ancient One, which in turn leads to him becoming the master of the mystic arts, learning how to infuse his tech and armor with magic to create a much more capable hero. As for Stephen though, he becomes almost like Baron Mordo and betrays Stark to Dormammu. Luckily, this isn't a list of better Stephen Strange alternates. Number 2, all new X-Men Annual number 1. But just to hammer home the idea that Stark would make a great Sorcerer Supreme, we actually have more than one alternate reality where this takes place. The second one I want to talk about today would be in all new X-Men Annual number 1 from 2014. This story showed us Iron Man from the temporary reality number of 591. Tony in this reality brought together the Avengers to permanently end the threat of Thanos on the universe, which resulted in the alien races of said universe rewarding the Earth and its heroes with advanced alien technology, turning the Earth into a utopia. Tony himself would start to lean more into his mystical side with all the extra time he had after saving the universe, eventually becoming the Sorcerer Supreme and being able to solve further conflicts without needing any kind of real fighting. Now last I've seen, this Tony was living youthfully comfortable at 126 years old. There are even more versions of Sorcerer Tonys out in the multiverse, but you can go find them yourself, because I'm done. After this number 1 point, Robert Downey Jr. Look, we can talk about magical Iron Mans all day, but nothing can really stand up to the closest thing we got to a real Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Tony Stark was the whole groundwork for the MCU, and his character endured for years. Taking aspects of the original character and adding some realism and a really likable performance made for a version of Iron Man that boosted up not only the comic book character's popularity, but through the MCU, it boosted up the popularity of comic books in general, and for us here at Top 10 Nerd, that is quite a statement. Being in a world that is a bit more grounded and relatable to our own, this Iron Man doesn't have as complex of a story, nor is he more powerful as his comic book counterpart, but he is more than impressive enough without that. Not to mention, he was the one to actually defeat Thanos in the end. His send-off from the MCU affected people who don't even read comic books, and I think that says a lot. Coming in at number 10 is The Maker. Despite his heroics in the 616 universe, we got to witness a spectacular fall from grace for the Reed Richards of the Ultimate Comics universe, otherwise known as Earth 1610. The Magneto of this universe unleashed the Ultimatum Wave, which caused a tidal wave that took out thousands of people. That event, combined with the stress of the Fantastic Four breaking up and Sue Storm rejecting his marriage proposal, caused Reed Richards to completely snap and blow up his childhood home. He went on to use aliens under his control to attack the heroes and was eventually defeated and disfigured by the Human Torch and flung into the negative zone. Reed somehow returned to Earth and took on the identity of the Maker and set out on a twisted quest to make the world his idea of perfect. He destroyed all the Asgardians in an attempt to understand Thor's power and launched an attack on Washington, D.C. The Maker then went on to do a lot of really twisted stuff, fighting the heroes of his own Earth as well as the heroes of Earth 616, proving that if not kept in check by a strong moral compass, Mr. Fantastic's amazing mind can be ultimately a source of terror. And now, he's literally recreating the Ultimate Universe by manipulating the timeline of another universe. Number 9. Ghost Spider. Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, is Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's first love interest, but from the alternate reality of Earth 65. In this reality, Gwen Stacy is bitten by the spider, granting her powers and keeping Peter Parker as some nerd, but also her initial love interest. Gwen was granted superhuman strength, speed, toughened flesh, and pretty much all the spider-based powers that the regular Spider-Man would possess. Where she differs in a pretty big way is that after Gwen is depowered, she instead successfully bonds with the Venom symbiote. Gwen learned to find a healthy balance with the symbiote. When she first bonded with Venom, thanks to a Matt Murdock version of Kingpin, she was rage-fueled and looking for revenge, but over time, she realized that she needed to control that and give Venom better qualities to enhance in order to find balance with the symbiote. In a way, Venom and Gwen became even greater heroes, helping each other out. Number 8. King Thor. It goes without saying that Thor, Odin's son, being a literal god, has an incredibly long lifespan. His father Odin is millions of years old, and Thor is meant to eventually exceed his dad as the new Allfather. In the alternate timeline of Earth 14412, he successfully does that. During the War of the Realms in this universe, Thor sacrificed his eye to obtain the knowledge to defeat Malekith the Accursed and was made Allfather of Asgard. Now at some point, Thor eventually left Asgard and joined Omnipotent City's Ministry of Interdeity Justice, meaning Thor became a cosmic god cop, preventing wars among various pantheons and arresting gods that broke their godly laws. After spending some time as a sentient planet, assisting Sorcerer Supreme Daemon Hellstrom, surviving in the frozen jungles of Jotunheim, falling in love with a frost giant, and having a few kids, Thor returned to Asgard and inherited the power of the Allfather from Odin, renaming it the Thor Force. It was after all those countless years that Thor's brother Loki instigated the annihilation of all life on Earth, just out of spite. But Thor still carried on, with the loss of his friends and comrades causing Thor to become a stern and cynical ruler, just like Odin was before him. Funnily enough, Wolverine also survived this long as well. I don't know how, but he did. Number 7. General James Howlett. Speaking of Wolverine, in the second volume of Extreme X-Men, joining a team of multi-dimensional mutants that hunt down evil Professor Xavier's across dimensions is a much different version of Wolverine. Hailing from the reality of Earth 12025, this version of our feral mutant is the Governor General of the Dominion of Canada and Viceroy of Her Majesty's expedition to Shangri-La. He is like a version of Wolverine who is also mixed with President Theodore Roosevelt. General James Howlett is an adventurer and hero alongside his partner and lover, the demigod Hercules, or Heracles, however you want to say it. These two shared a love that was built after years and years of working together, and their bond was so strong that Hercules gave James a super cool upgrade in the form of a skeleton made of adamantine, which is a godly golden metal even stronger than adamantium, making Wolverine completely indestructible and immune to telepathic attacks. Unfortunately though, due to the god-on-mortal nature of the relationship, the Greek gods banished the pair to Tartarus, where they basically just fight hordes and hordes of lost and damned souls for 4 years before escaping. Number 6. Dr. Strangefate. Dr. Strangefate is the only amalgam character from the DC Marvel Amalgam universe who understood the mashed up nature of said universe, and he also survived its destruction, meaning he survived the alienation of the 2 biggest comic book companies, which is impressive to say the least. With the combined might of 2 magical masters of the mystic arts, Marvel's Doctor Strange and DC's Dr. Fate, combined with a little extra Marvel's Professor X special sauce, Amalgam Amalgam's Charles Xavier toes the line between hero and villain to protect his universe. After saving Nabu, the Ancient One, Xavier was trained in the mystic and martial arts. In addition to being the world's supreme sorcerer, Strangefate was also the world's most powerful telepath, putting him at a crazy level of power, and he was even able to sneak into Strange's consciousness and convince Doctor Strange to recreate the Amalgam universe as a pocket dimension. Number 5. Old Man Logan. In the alternate universe where we are introduced to Old Man Logan and Old Man Hawkeye, everything is in shambles. It's an apocalyptic wasteland, and all because the villains, under the leadership of the Red Skull, had coordinated a massive attack on the world's superheroes, leaving only a very few alive. Logan himself was tricked into wiping out every single member of the X-Men, and while that is tragic, I do have to say it's incredibly impressive. Impressive or not though, it drove Logan mad with grief and he vowed to become a pacifist. He retired to a quiet farming family life, letting the world go to hell around him. But we need a story, so that cannot fly. Eventually being short on money and needing to help his family, he joins Hawkeye on an adventure across America to deliver a briefcase of super soldier serum. After he goes on this grand adventure, defeats the Red Skull and returns home, the Hulk gang had completely wiped out his family. This is when he finally gets to pop his claws for the first time since the story begins. He wipes out the entire gang and eviscerates the Hulk himself, and then eventually finds his way to the main Marvel universe. Another version of him even gets the powers of Venom as well, which is super cool. Number 4. Age of Apocalypse Nightcrawler. In the Age of Apocalypse, Nightcrawler is very similar to his Earth 616 counterpart, except he's an incredibly capable warrior brandishing dual blades at all times, and he isn't really as lovable as he would be normally. This Nightcrawler hates the church, having had a traumatic experience when he was younger, which is a far cry from the original Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler in this universe is also close to his mother, Mystique, which is why he gladly takes on the Darkholme last name. This Nightcrawler believes his biological father is Sabretooth, since Mystique stated that she had gone to the trouble of, quote, finding a father with fur when Nightcrawler complains he is cold. This version of Nightcrawler actually chooses to remain in the main 616 reality and joins up with X-Force. But being on Earth 616, he does get mistaken for the original Nightcrawler, which he does not appreciate. Like at one point, he even pushes Kitty Pryde for mistaking him for a resurrected Nightcrawler. Now while working with X-Force, he has successfully took out his reality's Blob by teleporting a shark into his stomach, which devoured Blob from the inside out, which is terrifying, and Iceman, who he led into a factory boiler room, where I guess you can imagine what happened next. Number 3. Ghost Panther. Ghost Panther from Marvel's Warp World is a combination of the Wakandan prince T'Challa, aka Black Panther, and the demonic spirit of vengeance, Ghost Rider. This combination is perfect to explore a new aspect of culture meeting mythology, which is the excuse we're gonna go with to justify a hellfire skeleton that rides a giant fiery panther. Don't you dare look at me and tell me that this is not amazing. Don't you dare. In this story, T'Challa was exiled from Wakanda for his arrogance and came to America, becoming a stunt rider named Johnny Blaze, which is very original. After an accident leaves him fighting for his life, a demon offers him his life in exchange for becoming the all-powerful Ghost Panther. In case you don't realize why this is awesome, let me reiterate that this is King T'Challa as a hellfire-wielding spirit of vengeance riding on top of a hellfire-covered panther. Need I say more? Number 2, Punisher Max. Punisher Max was an adult comic, and for a guy whose main thing is ushering people to the pearly gates, it makes sense that this setting suits his character best. Removing the Punisher from all the costumes and superpowers of the regular Marvel universe and dropping him right into an America facing the early days of the War on Terror, it kicked off with the CIA trying to recruit Frank, which sets off a violent political game. This Frank Castle was a veteran of the Cold War, running Black Ops alongside Nick Fury in Vietnam, and he is not someone you want to mess around with. with. Like, he lights out Microchip during the first storyline just for helping the CIA to even find Punisher. His enemies here are also much more threatening and scarily realistic compared to anything that Earth 616 has thrown at the Punisher, with a big shout out to Barracuda specifically. Another former soldier just as ruthless and skilled as Frank is. Punisher Max shows the very real physical and emotional damage that Frank Castle's crusade would cause him in real life, obviously with a tiny suspension of disbelief that comes with it being a comic book. If you choose to give it a read, just be warned, it is extremely graphic. Number 1, End of Time Doom. Earth 14412 is home to a variant of Doctor Doom who refers to himself as the Fist of Iron, the Starbrand Supreme, and the Master of Mystic Vengeance. This is End of Time Doom. In this reality, King Loki had destroyed all of humanity, with Doom being one of the few survivors. This gave Doom the opportunity to infuse himself with the powers of Iron Fist, Starbrand, the Sorcerer Supreme, and Ghost Rider, making him practically a god. King Thor and his 3 daughters, the Goddesses of Thunder, restored life to the Earth, and Doom showed up conveniently to conquer it. He completely owned the 3 daughters of Old King Thor, and he was only stopped when Old King Thor, who wielded the Thor Force, was also empowered by the Phoenix Force. It's such an epic version of Doctor Doom, of which there are honestly very many, but this one is my favorite. Kicking off our list at number 10, Spider. We are kicking off the list talking about a Peter Parker variant that's bonded with the Carnage symbiote coming from Earth 15 known as the Spider. This Peter coming from Earth 15 is a much more sadistic version of the Web Swinger. He's also a ginger, so that tells you all you need to know. The Spider claims that he has been sentenced to a total of 67 life sentences in prison for the crimes that he has committed, but of course, to make him just a bit more lovable, he has a great sense of humor, very much like that of Deadpool. It's great if you can look past a lot of the extra creepy factors of his character. The Spider was introduced in Exiles number 12 and was a big part of the reality-saving team featured in it, being a sometimes leader of said team. He was a very interesting take on what most people are used to from Spider-Man, having only like his humor and his leadership to make him genuinely likable. As a Carnage-bonded sociopath, he was pretty powerful, but he nonetheless was sent a one-way ticket to the afterlife with a blast from Firestar in Exiles number 44. Number 9, The Amazing Spider. This version of Spider-Man, similar to the Spider, is also evil, but instead of this being caused by a symbiote, on Earth 11638, it's actually the inclusion of Uncle Ben that makes this character go bad. In this world, Uncle Ben never loses his life, and instead, he helps train Peter Parker with his new spider powers, and eventually even helps him to form Parker Industries. Peter and Uncle Ben end up building a machine that allows Peter to lure other alternate versions of Spider-Man to this reality, where he promptly absorbs their powers to increase his own. It's incredibly evil, but it makes him the most powerful hero on that Earth and eliminates the need for any other hero to even exist. His whole plan came unraveled when he tried to do this to the Spider-Man from Earth 616 though. When faced with our main Spider-Man, the powerful version of Peter loses his life and his soul is sent to hell, where he becomes fused with the spirit of vengeance, becoming the Ghost Rider Spider. And it's incredibly cool. Number 8, Takuya Yamashiro. Instead of being Peter Parker, the Japanese Spider-Man, Spooderman, is Takuya Yamashiro, a motocross racer and son of astrophysicist Dr. Hiroshi Yamashiro. Unlike most versions of Spider-Man, Takuya was introduced through a live-action Japanese Spider-Man TV show. With that, his character is, 1, really popular, but also differs quite a bit. For starters, his spider powers are a little less powerful due to budget constraints for the show, but to make up for that, he utilizes a whole frickin' mech named Leopardon. He uses Leopardon and his spider abilities to fight the Iron Cross Army, which is a group of suspiciously human-looking aliens from an unnamed world who are led by Professor Monster. Yes, I know it's a dumb name, just let it go. Due to his popularity and just how awesome he is, Takuya has become an official character in the multiverse, coming from Earth 51778, fighting against the Inheritors alongside the Spider Army, and he is set to appear in the second animated Spider-Verse movie, which is gonna be great. Number 7, Peter Parquagh. Fans of this channel may know the special place that Marvel 1602 has in my heart. Written by Neil Gaiman, the story takes tons of familiar heroes and villains and displaces them into an Elizabethan setting. Our friendly neighborhood Spider, being the face of Marvel, obviously got his own 1602 version. In this world, the orphan Peter was raised by his Scottish uncle Benjamin and his wife until one year, on his birthday, Sir Nicholas Fury came to his door. Fury had known Peter's parents and sought Peter to enter into his service, and he became Fury's assistant. Now that alone, a Peter Parker who worked under Nick Fury, is a cool concept. But I think one of my favorite parts about this version of Peter is that he doesn't actually have his spider powers. Throughout the run of the comic, which saw Peter escorting Virginia Dare, visiting the Doctor Strange and Professor X of this world, meeting a ton of royalty, having run-ins with the Hulk, and traveling to the New World, Peter kept almost coming into contact with certain suspicious looking spiders. It wasn't until the last issue of the initial comic when he was finally bit and gained superpowers. Number 6. Spider-Man Noir. Listen here, see? After seeking out sweet vengeance on the criminal known as the Goblin for taking away the life of his Uncle Ben, our young hero Peter Parker goes off to a warehouse to do some investigating. Turns out that there is a spider idol in this warehouse containing thousands of spiders. Once the idol is broken, one of these spiders bites Peter, prompting an incredibly real version of a spider god, who seemingly grants the abilities of a human spider on our hero. He is granted most of the same powers as regular Spider-Man, with a bit less strength and a stronger healing factor. He also gains the ability to use organic webbing, which can be gross, but in this time it's cool. Spider-Man Noir may not be the most powerful alternate spider. There are plenty of others who have added abilities, but he has the power of popularity on his side, not to mention a killer look and story that makes him a fan favorite character ever since his introduction. Number 5. Spider-Man 2099. Instead of getting bitten by a radioactive super spider, Miguel O'Hara's DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA to save his life after he was forcibly hooked on a not far off future substance by his employer. If that sounds convoluted, well, yeah, it is, but it also sounds right at home in a comic book. Although the process of gaining his powers differed from Peter Parker, Miguel was still granted some of the same abilities at a pretty similar level. One thing that differs largely is Miguel's spider sense. He doesn't have one. Instead, Miguel has advanced super senses similar to someone like Daredevil. Miguel also has some abilities that are just wholly unique to him. For example, he possesses an incredible level of super speed, as well as telepathic communication abilities, both of which are really cool. He also has fangs and claws on his fingers and toes that he can use in combat, which is still cool, but a little bit freaky. On top of all those powers though, Miguel is from the year 2099, which obviously means that he naturally has a much more advanced set of technology at his disposal. But it's not just his powers and technology that make him better. The Spider-Man 2099 story is awesome, but you'll have to do the necessary reading to figure that out for yourself. Number 4. Mayday Parker. First appearing in a What If number 105 from December 1997, Mayday Parker is the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane from a future alternate world. Coming from Earth 982, Mayday Parker becomes Spider-Girl and eventually Spider-Woman, filling in the role that her father once held. Where she is only slightly weaker than Peter in the strength department, she is much more agile, which I didn't even know was possible. Mayday also has a stronger, more precise spider sense, but on top of those advancements, her ability to stick to surfaces is considerably more powerful than Peter's and is actually pretty unique. Wall crawling does not come as naturally to May, and she has to concentrate to stick to surfaces, but she also has the ability to transmit her electrostatic stickiness through surfaces, making everyone and everything else stick to that surface, which is just nuts. What's even cooler is that she can reverse the ability, and instead of stick, she can repel. This adds power to her jumps, but can also be used to repel even people and objects away from her at speed. Mayday is awesome, and I can't wait to see what Marvel does with her going forward. Number 3. Ghost Spider. Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, is Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's first love interest, but from the alternate reality of Earth 65. In this reality, Gwen Stacy is bitten by the spider, granting her powers and keeping Peter Parker as some nerd, but also her initial love interest. Gwen was granted superhuman strength, speed, toughened flesh, and pretty much all the spider-based powers that the regular Spider-Man would possess. Where she differs in a pretty big way is that after Gwen was depowered, she instead successfully bonded with the Venom symbiote. Gwen learned to find a very healthy balance with her symbiote. When she first bonded with Venom, thanks to a Matt Murdock version of Kingpin, she was rage-fueled and looking for revenge, but over time she realized that she needed to control that and give Venom better qualities to enhance in order to find balance with the symbiote. So in a way, Venom and Gwen became even greater heroes, helping each other out. Number 2, Miles Morales. Following the passing of Peter Parker in Marvel's Ultimate Universe, Miles Morales was bitten by an enhanced spider that caused him to pass out and foam at the mouth. When he awoke though, he discovered he had superpowers, and that's pretty cool. Taking on the role of the new Spider-Man, Miles is one of the only characters to fully inhabit the Spider-Man mantle with almost complete support from the fans. Miles Morales is an incredible character. He has his own villains and interpersonal connections to make him wholly his own, but having the Spider-Man name also pulls him into contact with many mainstays of the Spider-Man mythos. He has almost all of the regular Spider abilities plus some amazing powers unique to himself, like his Venom, which is like a form of bioelectricity that he can emit from his body. Miles is also able to use a spider camouflage to make his whole body go invisible. Miles was so popular that his character got pulled over to the main Marvel universe after Secret Wars, making him one of the few surviving characters from the Ultimate Universe. And finally, in at number 1 today, it's Ultimate Spider-Man. Speaking of the Ultimate Universe, I think it's only fair to talk about that universe's Peter Parker. The Ultimate Spider-Man comic run is considered by a lot of people to be one of the absolute best Spider-Man runs ever. Being one of the best things to come from writer Brian Michael Bendis, Ultimate Spider-Man revamped the origin of the Spider-Man character for modern audiences in the 2000s, but also made Peter Parker even younger. The story follows the original story pretty closely, with only minor tweaks and changes that make it even better or more digestible for younger audiences, like the fixes made to the Clone Saga story or even the changes made to the Venom symbiote. The Earth 1610 comic book run had one writer at the helm, which really helped to maintain consistency throughout the story, whereas Earth 616's Amazing Spider-Man carried on for 50 years and had many writers coming in to build the story, unfortunately giving it areas that lacked to some degree. Ultimate Spider-Man took a great idea and then ran with it, building up an incredible cast of characters and injecting a great deal of emotion and heart into the story as it took familiar ideas in bold new directions. That's why Ultimate Spider-Man is the #1 spot for Spider-Man Alternates who can even attempt to be better than the original. Coming in at number 10 is Superior Spider-Man. This version of Spider-Man is technically not an alternate. He comes from the 616 Earth and fits into the regular Spider-Man continuity, but so many of you guys suggested this Spider-Man, and how am I going to say no to you guys? For those of you who don't know, the Superior Spider-Man is actually Dr. Otto Octavius, but you may have noticed he's decidedly less out of shape, and that's because Otto was able to finally defeat Spider-Man by transferring his consciousness out of his own dying body and placing it into the healthy, superpowered body of Peter Parker. With Peter's consciousness seemingly passing away inside of Otto's body, it's like Freaky Friday, only much more serious and with Spider-Man. You might think that a villain inhabiting the body of Spider-Man would be a bad thing, and in some ways, you are right. Otto was extremely ruthless when using the powers of Spider-Man, but the thing is, he was still operating as a heroic Spider-Man. Inside the body of Spider-Man and sharing all of Peter's memories, Doc Ock had a bit of a change of heart and decided to use his vast intelligence and unrelenting nature, dedicating himself to being a better hero, a superior Spider-Man. Number 9, Spider-Punk. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 10 from November 2014, Hobart Hobby Brown became Spider-Man when he got bit by a radioactive spider from illegal waste dumping and decided to use his powers to go against the authority. Hell yeah. The President of the United States in this reality is Norman Osborn, who is also still the CEO of Oscorp. Funnily enough, Oscorp in this reality also created Venom, aka VENOM, aka Variable Engagement Neurosensitive Organic Mesh. So, Venom here is created in a lab, like a bioweapon, one that President Osborn gives to his lackeys and dons on himself. So it's an army of Venom-powered soldiers led by a Venom-powered President Norman Osborn. But Spider-Punk also has many of his own followers behind him. Fighting for their beliefs, the Spider Army is a group of punks ready to stand their ground with Spider-Man as their punk rock leader. Unfortunately for Osborn, their Venom is just as weak to sound as the Venom we all know and love. And we are shown this when Spider-Punk plays his electric guitar at full volume, completely blasting away the symbiotes as the two groups clash. He bashed his guitar on Norman's head, defeating him and liberating everyone. It was awesome. Super cool. Number 8, Spooderman. Spooderman. Yes, I am including a poorly drawn version of Spider-Man on this list. Speaking with bad grammar, foul language, and mainly in dirty quotes that I am simply not allowed to utter on YouTube, Spooderman isn't for kids, but he's still a Spider-Man, dammit, and one with cultural impact. Spooderman was created on February 5th, 2011 on MS Paint, I'm pretty sure, and he traveled into the web of the internet, popping up here and there for years. Unfortunately, in the real world, the creator of Spooderman, YouTube channel Jordan Clory, passed away on February 14th, 2022, which was 11 days after Spooderman's 11th birthday. Spooderman is quite self-centered, often going on and on about how he has swag, but he isn't so self-centered as to not come to the aid of the Spider-Verse in the animated Spider-Verse movies. While not a central figure to the story by any means, he is seen briefly while going over the countless versions of Spider-Man throughout the multiverse. Number 7. Spider-Boy. In the world of the Amalgam universe, Peter Parker was the head of the team trying to create a clone of Super Soldier, who was a Superman Captain America amalgamation. The clone used the DNA of Peter, making it technically a clone of Peter Parker, and it had the power to warp gravity. Unfortunately, an explosion took Peter's life and awoke the clone before the time was right. In this universe, General Ross took the clone under his wing, adopting him and naming him Peter in honor of his creator. Peter, Ross, and the General made a pretty happy family until Uncle Jen was then robbed of life by a mugger. This then prompted the clone to go on as Spider-Boy, a cross of both Spider-Man, or even of Ben Reilly if you think about it, from Marvel, and Superboy from DC Comics. Spider-Boy was an instant favorite of the Amalgam universe, but unfortunately, DC and Marvel don't get along like they once did, so we probably won't see him for a very long time. Number 6. House of M's Spider-Man. So this version of Peter Parker, like a lot of other people in the House of M reality, actually had a better life, at least in the beginning. He stopped the robber who would have taken his Uncle Ben's life, so Uncle Ben is still alive, and the two created a version of Parker Industries. Since he stopped the robber, he also had a lucrative career as a wrestler, and then he became a very successful actor, even working with Mary Jane Watson, helping to make her a star actress. Gwen Stacy also never passed away, so Peter and her married and had a child together. The problems really come for this Spider-Man when the mutant-human war finally began. Peter, being so famous as a superhero, was immediately accused of being a mutant, but under the guidance of his Uncle Ben, Peter went along with it, pretending to be a mutant, becoming an idol for mutant children everywhere. A false idol though. It was only a matter of time before he was found out, and then he came under public fire for misrepresenting himself as a mutant for years. A movie he starred in about his life was pulled from theaters, stock in his business began to tank, his family members were forced to seclude themselves in their estate, and the conflict became so bad Peter had to fake his own passing and go into hiding. Number 5. Tom. I remember when I learned that the new Spider-Man who would be swinging into the MCU would be Tom Holland, and while at first I think I and a lot of people were skeptical of anyone who would step into the role of Marvel's #1 hero, Tom really killed it. Coming in for the first time in the MCU's Civil War, not only did we get the coolest intro to Peter himself with Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, but then the guy shows up at the airport battle and the first thing he does is steal Captain America's shield. And then he proceeds to make Falcon and the Winter Soldier look like complete chumps. But then we got a whole trilogy of films, each one knocking it out of the park, and almost followed a backwards approach to the films before it, giving us Peter living life in high school for 2 whole movies before he finally comes into his own at the end of the 3rd film, and now the character can go literally anywhere. I just want to know what's gonna happen next. In at number 4, Andrew. The second person to bring Spider-Man to the big screen, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies were a mixed bag. Some people were not as much of a fan of the Sony-backed films themselves, but almost no one I know had a complaint against Andrew himself or the way he played Spider-Man. Of the actors to play the wall crawler, I think this Spider-Man had some of the best quips, and he also looked freaking sweet. The chemistry between Peter and Gwen Stacy was also incredibly real feeling, which made it all the more emotionally devastating when Peter lost her. The villains of this version of Peter also had a much more genuine connection to the hero than the MCU version of the character. We got to see him create his own web shooters, unlike either of the other live action versions, showing us how smart he actually is, and this version of Peter was a much more believable and likable oddball. If you ask me, the first movie was better than the second, but man, I wish we got a 3rd movie. Number 3, Toby. If we're gonna talk about Tom and Andrew, we need to talk talk about the first one to bring it all to the screen, Toby Maguire. This version of Spider-Man, and honestly his supporting cast, all gave a life to the character and characters of the Spider-Man mythos that we had never seen before. Peter in this universe is much more dorky. Like, you really believe that this guy is a big old nerd turned superhero. But it also makes him incredibly likable when coupled with how much of a genuine hero he actually is. Not only that, but his connection with Uncle Ben and Aunt May was probably the most real of any live action adaptation, which made it so much more real when Peter lost his uncle. The other thing with the original trilogy of Spider-Man movies is that Peter struggled. His character was constantly trying to make money or keep his relationships afloat, he was struggling to pay rent, and he was taking care of Aunt May, all while trying to balance being a web-swinging superhero who was constantly losing his powers and dealing with his idols always becoming some of the best supervillains to come to movies. Well, at least in the first two movies. Also, we got Bully Maguire, and that's really cool. So, number 2, Pavitr Prabhakar. Pavitr Prabhakar first came to us in Spider-Man India #1 back in January of 2005, and man, is he awesome. As a young poor kid, Pavitr went to live with his Uncle Bim and Aunt Maya in Mumbai. Pavitr was bullied on the regs, and while being chased by other kids one day, he came into contact with an ancient yogi who ended up giving him the power of a spider to fight against evil. While figuring out his powers, Pavitr refused to help a woman being attacked by several men, and this led to the passing of his Uncle Bim at the hands of those men, since Bim tried to help her when Spider-Man wouldn't. And just like that, as with all Spider-Men, Pavitr learned that with great power comes great responsibility. His powers, weaknesses, and pretty much everything else are very similar to Earth 616 Spider-Man, but usually with a bit of a mystical twist given the way in which he received his powers. He has faced villains like Nalan Oberoi, a crime lord who used an amulet to get demonic powers, and Dr. Octopus, who had demon arms that were given to him by Nalan. In the Spider-Verse, he battled alongside Superior Spider-Man, Spider-Man UK, and all his other alternates as one of the best of the bunch. Finally, in at number 1, Ben Reilly. Technically, just like Superior Spider-Man, this alternate Spider-Man isn't an alternate Spider-Man at all. Ben Reilly is a Peter Parker clone from the 616 continuity, but don't think that makes him any less awesome. Ben has all the same powers as Spider-Man with a much darker story. As Scarlet Spider, Ben was a favorite among fans, even outshining Spider-Man himself on a few occasions, but he has gone through so many twists and turns throughout his time. So after being created by a villain known as the Jackal, Ben would be defeated, but in secret he would go into hiding for 5 years, returning to New York as the Scarlet Spider. Ben even stepped into the role of Spider-Man himself during a brief period of time, and at the end of that arc, Ben would lose his life, only to be resurrected and then taken to the afterlife over and over and over again by his creator. This drove him completely insane, driving him to overthrow his creator and become the new Jackal. He eventually went back to being the Scarlet Spider, became Spider-Man again, and now he is the totally awesome Chasm.
At number 10 we have Throg. This guy deserves a spot on the list, mainly for the meme, but also because it's one of the iterations of Thor that doesn't take itself too seriously. For those who don't already know, this is obviously a trick played by Loki to humiliate his brother Thor. In Thor number 365, Throg makes his first appearance when Loki decides he wants to get a laugh out of his otherwise very serious and stoic brother. But this isn't the last time we see him. In an issue of What If that plays out if the X-Men stayed on Asgard, a Thorified version of Storm faces off against Throg for the glory of Asgard, which is pretty bonkers. I mean, you know how what ifs can be, right? It's definitely a bizarre moment that's probably meant for a laugh more than anything else. But believe it or not, this still isn't the last time Throg makes an appearance. We see him yet again in Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers #1 in 2009 alongside other animal versions of the Avengers. I guess readers just couldn't get enough of the little guy. He must have been rated pretty well because he just keeps coming back. He's funny looking. At number 9 we have Ultimate Thor. Being a pretty controversial set of comics, the Ultimate series sets the stage for some fun new characters, as uncanny and overly dark as they can sometimes be. But Thor's variant in the series is anything but a miss. Originally dismissed by his teammates on the Ultimates as being crazy, this version of Thor unusually feels the need to prove himself to them in order to gain their trust and respect as the God of Thunder. He's got almost the same powers as the Earth 616 Thor, but he's rocking a different look that's pretty cool, and also a magical belt that he wears which seems to give him a boost of power. He also holds an axe instead of a hammer, which I just think is a pretty cool touch to have him stand out from his 616 counterpart. At number 8 we've got Thor 2099, where this world's Thor is actually a priest named Cecil McAdams, who is part of a religion devoted solely to the original Thor, who had lived 100 years before by this point. What's bizarre about this character is that he doesn't actually come by Thor's powers naturally. His abilities are granted to him by the CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, who has convinced him that he's a Norse god. It's actually a pretty dark reality playing out during the series, with most of the world being run by corporations and greedy multimillionaires. And on top of all that, genuine superheroes are pretty scarce during these times, unless they're created synthetically like McAdams is. Although it sounds like I'm basically just outing this guy as a fraud, he still means entirely well, and he's passionate about Norse mythology. What I find really cool about this character is that he's become a superhero through passion and obsession with the real Thor, which sort of turns him into a pretty genuinely powerful and motivated variant, especially since he fully believes he's the real deal. At number 7 is Thor Herald of Galactus. This one doesn't need much explanation for those who already know the role of the Herald of Galactus, but basically Galactus is this enormous cosmic being that has an insatiable hunger for planets. So he goes around consuming them with absolutely zero remorse. But even a being as gigantic and powerful as Galactus needs some help to get his destructive work done. So he always has someone called a herald that helps guide him through the cosmos and find the next planets for him to consume. In exchange, the heralds are granted ownership over the power cosmic, which basically gives them a fraction of Galactus' power, which even a fraction is a ton if you know Galactus. With the power cosmic, the herald is then able to travel at immeasurable speeds through the cosmos and harness almost limitless power in order to fulfill their duties. And at one point, Thor is chosen as the next herald. His costume changes to something much darker and even cooler in some ways, and also if you imagine Thor's powers paired with the effects of the aforementioned power cosmic, then you can also imagine why this variant deserved a spot on this list in terms of power as well. At number 6 is Iron Hammer. This is such a cool variant because he answers the question, what would happen if Thor and Iron Man combined their abilities into one hero? When Gamora manipulates the souls of the Marvel Universe and mixes them all together, she ends up creating a whole new world called Warp World. Sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Sounds like the name of a crappy small town arcade, and we all know those are always the best ones. But it is far from that. It's actually a universe where every soul is combined with another within the Marvel Universe. This event basically creates a mixture of Thor and Iron Man, aka Stark Odinson, son of Howard Odin. Riveting bit of writing right there. Basically, this variant ends up with a pretty cool new look as well as a brand new set of capabilities that basically combine Iron Man's wit and intelligence with Thor's supreme godlike power. I mean, even if this was just Iron Man wielding Mjolnir, it would be cool enough, but part of Thor is still in there somewhere, which makes it even more insane to imagine how powerful this variant could be. At number 5 is Beta Ray Bill. This guy is a very aggressive but also very respectable Thor variant. He sort of just butts into Thor's life and takes his title without even so much as a conversation first. It's sort of funny actually. They start as rivals and quickly become friends when they realize they pretty much match each other's power levels almost identically. Basically, Beta Ray Bill is a champion from his own world of Corbin, and when it's tragically destroyed by Searcher, he is forced to go on a pilgrimage to find a new home with a group of his own kind. And guess where they end up? They end up in the Milky Way. But as he's entering Thor's airspace, Thor decides it's kind of his duty to go and check in on the caravan with no intention to do any harm, just to check. But Thor's motivations are totally misunderstood by Beta Ray Bill, and he decides to launch a counterattack, thinking Thor is approaching aggressively. They both fight, and the battle ends with actually a victory for Beta Ray Bill, who then promptly picks up Thor's hammer without issue. This comes as an absolute shock to Thor and everyone else because this has otherwise been an extremely uncommon occurrence up to this point. Thankfully for Thor, Odin rules that instead of offering Mjolnir to Beta Ray Bill, he would instead craft a whole new weapon for the Corbinite called Stormbreaker. After all this is settled, Beta Ray Bill actually ends up becoming a friend of Thor's and even steps in for the God of Thunder when he's out of town or out of commission. At number 4, we have Old King Thor. This version of the God of Thunder is basically an older, futuristic version of the 616 counterpart we're used to. Hailing from Earth 14412, this version of Thor is the All-Father and ruler of Asgard as we currently know Odin to be. His look is pretty intimidating, having a more advanced and seemingly fortified armor as well as only one eye. The eye is missing because similarly to his father, Odin, he too gave his eye in exchange for all the knowledge in the 9 realms. On top of all that, old King Thor seems to have refined and perfected all of his abilities, meaning that it could be pretty easily argued that this version of Thor is in fact better than the original. In terms of power levels at least. And I think it's also always helpful for a hero to have more wisdom as well, which we can all safely say old King Thor has in droves. I mean, just look at him. Although to be fair to Thor 616, it's sort of known that old King Thor is just an older version of 616 Thor, even though he's from Earth 14412. Now, I'm not sure if Thor developed some ability to travel to other realities, but old King Thor has suggested a few times before that if 616 Thor were to die, he would too. So there may not be any comparison since they're kind of the same dude. Just one is a lot older and arguably more badass looking. At number 3 is Jane Foster. This version of Thor has one of the most intriguing backstories on the list. Jane Foster is just an average mortal from Earth 616 who basically discovers that she's capable of lifting Mjolnir. The way this happens is that Jane gets a job as a nurse and befriends Thor, who is in his human form, resembling a rather frail doctor named Donald Blake, but eventually he reveals his true identity to Jane as well as confessing his love for her. She then becomes the first mortal that has ever been brought to Asgard, but when she's endowed with Asgardian powers, she becomes overwhelmed by the responsibilities, and so Odin deems her not ready for the task, sending her back to Earth and wiping her memory. But once again, years down the line, she reunites with Donald Blake, aka Thor, and they fall in love once again, but only after a pretty rocky reunion. She's then tragically diagnosed with cancer, the illness that killed her mother when she was only 9 years old. And fast forwarding a bit, Thor is battling on Earth's moon when he realizes that he has lost his ability to wield Mjolnir, and when the hammer begins to call to Jane, she soon learns that she is meant to become the new Thor. The hammer seeks her out telepathically and she travels to find it on the moon. When she successfully lifts it, she transforms into a powerful goddess. Well, she transforms into Thor, and her health immediately increases as well as her physical appearance. She then goes on to be a really powerful and impressive version of Thor and even sacrifices herself at one point for Asgard, but is revived by Odin for her heroism. This is just such a cool and satisfying story of a Thor finding her way, starting as a mortal and becoming one of the most powerful gods in the cosmos. And despite all the bad hands dealt to her by life too. At number 2, we've got Thor-El, which you can maybe guess is basically a combination of Superman and Thor. One interesting thing about this guy off the bat is that he's blue. This is because when the two characters merge, Superman is in his blue energy form, and this merge that I mentioned is referring to the Ultimate Access crossover from the 90s. During this series, Marvel and DC laid down their feud to give fans a really interesting look into a world where Marvel and DC characters have both merged. And what a great combination to see merged into one, Superman and Thor. This is almost an unfair marriage of abilities, which makes probably one of the most powerful Thors on this list, actually arguably the most powerful, that is, if the number 1 spot on the list wasn't a thing. I know his accolades might not be the most extensive given the extremely short run of the character. In fact, he only really exists for about half an issue, but I really don't think the character should be written off due to his brevity. This list is about the value of a character in relation to the original Thor we're used to, and just adding Superman to an already powerful and extremely impressive hero, there's no question that this one has a leg up on Thor 616. At number 1, we've got Old Phoenix King Thor, or King Phoenix God of Fire. And if you're already pretty sure what this variant is all about, you're probably right, because the name is pretty self-explanatory. He's Old King Thor, having been overtaken by the Phoenix Force. In 2018's Thor Volume 5 Issue 6, Thor is facing off against Dr. Doom in a distant future, when he also encounters a Phoenix-possessed Wolverine, who is basically a walking, flaming adamantium skeleton at that point. And only when Wolverine reaches to grab Thor's hammer does he basically explode and disappear and pass on the Phoenix Force to Mjolnir, which just leaves Old King Thor and Dr. Doom to face off. But This isn't any ordinary Doctor Doom, it's a Doctor Doom endowed with the powers of the Iron Fist, Starbrand, Doctor Strange, and Ghost Rider all in one. And with the prosperity of Earth on the line, old King Thor knows that he has to act fast not to end up overpowered by his supercharged Doctor Doom variant. So he makes the bold move of grabbing the hammer and allowing himself to be overtaken by Phoenix Force. With old King Thor being one of the most powerful versions on the list, this variant instantly becomes hands down the most powerful we've ever seen.
At number 10 we have Cyclops, aka Basilisk. This alternate Cyclops from the Age of X Alpha storyline is so intimidating that you might mistake him for a supervillain. With a backstory so dark, it'll leave you wondering how he didn't become one. It all began at the age of 14 when his powers activated without warning while he was in a movie theater, liquefying 7 people including his parents. Scott was incarcerated thereafter, eventually being transferred to Alcatraz after the Emergency Power Act rendered the prison a mutants only facility, where he caught the attention of Arcade, who's got quite the name for a prison governor. It was thanks to Arcade that we get this epic mask, complete with ruby quartz lenses in the eye holes to inhibit Scotty's eye lasers, and a remote control mechanism that has the mask open down the middle, enabling the beams to pass through. In fact, Arcade had Scotty's eyelids surgically removed in order to prevent him from shutting off his eye beams by himself, so that he could use Scott against his will as an execution method for the other mutant inmates. And after several years of this, Scott managed to get a hold of the remote and blasted his way out of the prison, freeing the remaining mutants and vaporizing Arcade. And before you ask, no, the Basilisk does not turn people to stone with his gaze. He turns them to ash. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. And without further ado, let's get into number 9. Doctor Strangefate. Ah yes, the good old DC vs Marvel comics. The series that not only pit all of our favorite heroes against one another despite their conflicting franchises, but did so while introducing amalgamations of our favorite heroes and villains. One such hero was the amalgamation of Charles Xavier, Doctor Strange, and DC's Dr. Fate, but as it turns out, this convoluted mashup of a character is more than just a one-hit wonder. See, Strangefate had discovered that restoring the Marvel and DC universes would result in the destruction of his own amalgam universe, and so he did everything that he could to try and prevent it, which, judging by the fact that you've probably never heard of this dude, was a task that he ultimately failed. However, while he couldn't prevent the destruction of his reality, he decided that he could at least save his own tail, and he did so by infusing his own psyche deep within that of Doctor Strange, where he was able to subtly manipulate the Sorcerer Supreme into creating several cross-dimensional incursions, but ultimately his existence was discovered by Batman and Access. And so, instead of just erasing the dude, Strange decides to preserve the entire amalgam universe within a pocket dimension, thus ensuring that Strangefate would never be able to menace with the Marvel or DC universes again. At number 8 we have Jean Grey the Conqueror. We all know Marvel just loves to introduce super cool takes on our favorite characters and then proceed to do absolutely nothing with them. I'm looking at you, Galactus Buster Armor, and no missed opportunity makes me as sad as this entry does, cause in the all new X-Men number 25, we're briefly told about numerous dark realities which don't end very well for our X-Men, including an alternate reality in which Jean Grey was consumed by her inner darkness and went on to conquer the planet by force. You see, a couple realities next door, and Jean Grey ain't the telepathic sweetheart we all know and love, on account of the fact that her early formative years were not spent with Charles Xavier, who was to teach her how to control her powers and to help her mold her persona, thus putting her in touch with her humanity. Instead, the Jean of this Earth listened to Magneto, who taught her how it was a mutant's birthright to conquer, leading her to decide that the reason she was born with her powers was just that. And I don't know about you, but I definitely need the whole story which takes place in this reality. Marvel, if you're listening, get on it. At number 7 we have Professor Drake. Old Man Winter over here proves single-handedly that there is still hope for those of us who can't grow a beard. But who is the Ice Master, you ask? Well, simply put, he's the elderly future version of our favorite Iceman, with a new fitting superhero name to match his wizard-like appearance. See, fashion doesn't get much better in the future, so Ice Master makes do with his cloak. But the most notable difference, besides the beard of course, is how the Ice Master is able to more effectively channel his ice powers thanks to that ice spear of his. Man, if I had $1 for every time I said ice. Ice Master only really comes around with his presence as needed in the past, like that time he came from the future to the present to tell his younger self to give up fighting as it only leads to a dark future. Iceman ain't too convinced and the two even duke it out against one another. But they don't stay at each other's throats for long. In fact, during the second issue of Battle of the Atom, we get to see Iceman across 3 different eras fighting alongside each other. But regardless of which era we're talking about, I'm sure a lot of us can agree that Ice Master is the coolest. Ice cool, that is. At number 6, Planet X Rogue. The version of Rogue we get in Uncanny Avengers is probably the most powerful Rogue we've ever seen, and yes, that includes the countless versions of her imbued with the Phoenix Force. After taking a fatal blow that led me to believe that she expired for like half a dozen issues, she played a crucial role in thwarting off a celestial attack by absorbing the powers of every X-Men and Avenger available. We're talking hundreds of superheroes here, imbuing her with what's basically every superpower at once. And these powers ain't from lackluster players either. We've got some big names here like the Hulk and Wonder Man, just to name a couple. She becomes so insanely powerful that she's able to single-handedly slow Exitar's descent to Earth by pushing up against the bottom of his foot, and when Death Sentry held the other foot, Exitar was halted completely. Like, come on, you don't think that's epic? Sure, she couldn't stop him on her own, but come on, this dude is big enough to size up our entire planet, for crying out loud. His shoe size is bigger than Rhode Island. Need I go on? At number 5 is Bloodstorm. This version of Storm from an alternate reality is very similar to her canonical 616 counterpart, save for the fact that she was captured by Count Dracula in an attempt to turn her into his bride. And after becoming the vampiric Bloodstorm, she easily overthrew the Count and helped the X-Men defeat him. However, she ultimately decided not to return to the X-Men on account of her vampirism. She was later imprisoned by some of Dracula's disciples, and while attempting to escape, Monroe was confronted by one of her former teammates, Kitty Pryde, who attacked Bloodstorm as she'd rather see her friend perish than be a vampire. But Kitty hesitated at the last second, falling prey to Bloodstorm as her first victim. There's also a Bloodstorm from an alternate reality in which she was captured by Dracula first before joining the X-Men, where her bloodlust sadly overpowered her, resulting in her taking a big ol' bite of at least both Beast and Professor X. This reality's weather-controlling vampire proves without a doubt that sometimes the best way to improve a character is by adding fangs. At number 4 is Belasco, and no, I'm not talking about the supervillain. I'm talking about the X-Man who became the supervillain in an alternate timeline, that X-Man being Nightcrawler. And if that sounds a bit convoluted, you ain't heard of nothing yet. You see, the events of this timeline closely resemble that of Earth 616. That is until Nightcrawler loses his arm in battle and is forced to teleport to safety. Unfortunately for him, thanks to some Terrigen mist, some weird opposite day stuff is going on as he finds that everyone in the town he's transported himself to are mutants, whereas conversely the Nightcrawler seemed to be stripped of all his mutant powers and appearance, making him stand out as a regular dude among thousands of mutants. Yeah, for once it would have actually paid for Kurt to be blue. Kurt was attacked and slain by the people of the village for being different, because even though everything's different, nothing's really changed. Now, moments away from his own demise, Kurt was approached by the demonic Mephisto, who empowered that bitter voice deep down in Kurt's heart, which always tempted him to believe that those hateful and fearful beings he was sworn to protect were not worth the effort. Now imbued with a deep thirst for revenge against the world for treating him like the monster he appeared to be, Kurt was transformed into a demonic entity imbued with demonic powers and false memories that would perpetuate his unrelenting hatred, and manifesting the spitting image of Belasco, the X-Men's former nemesis. In fact, it was revealed that the Nightcrawler had actually been this reality's Belasco all along, thanks in part to a time loop set in motion by Captain America, who refused to deal with Mephisto and some time traveling shenanigans. It's even hinted that Belasco's frequent targeting of the X-Men over the years is actually a subconscious cry for help. So this version of Nightcrawler makes her the perfect evil counterpart, as this pure-hearted X-Men had been compensating for his monstrous appearance with genuine kindness and optimism, doing his best to protect the world that hated him. Yet thanks to Mephisto, Kurt was forced into becoming the very thing he feared the most. At number 3 is Death. What do you get when you merge Wolverine with the Horsemen of the Apocalypse? You get the Eternal Rest itself. During an Avengers event which saw Kang damage the time stream, something he's prone to do at this point, the Avengers were faced with Apocalypse and his 4 horsemen, all of whom bearing uncannily resemblances to our favorite superheroes. We've got a demonic-looking 8-armed, 4-legged Spider-Man as our first horseman, Red Hulk as the Horseman of War, Scarlet Witch with the Black Horse, and finally Wolverine, the Horseman of Eternal Rest. And as for what makes this Wolverine special, aside from the fact that he's permanently fused with a floating horse, is the fact that Wolverine now embodies the very entropy of the universe itself. Well, that is, if he didn't already. At number 2 is The Witness. This alternate reality version of Gambit is himself a temporal anomaly existing at the junction where all timelines converge, thus allowing the Witness to exist at all points in time at once, enabling to perceive everything before it happens, and making for one of the coolest X-Men in the multiverse. Now, being the anomaly that he is, much of his origin is shrouded in mystery. In fact, when Bishop was tasked with gathering as much info on the dude as he could, the only clue he got was him saying, "I am LeBeau." and more than LeBeau, which is about as cryptic as you can get. Now, upon deeper investigation, I discovered that while many assumed the Witness to be an elderly Rami LeBeau, otherwise known as Gambit, it was revealed in the X-Men Future History Messiah War sourcebook, holy cow, what a mouthful, that the Witness was actually a different person altogether, a conclusion that I personally reject. I mean, come on, you're telling me that the Witness, the last guy to ever see the X-Men alive, whose name is LeBeau, isn't actually Gambit? Like, they both even share the same Cajun accent, for crying out loud. Now, this could be explained by a flashback where we see a 6-year-old Remy running into the Witness by chance, who became somewhat of Remy's mentor. But that doesn't really eliminate the possibility of these two being one and the same, since the Witness is a time traveler after all. There's also that time in Gambit issue number 10 when Gambit is on their hunt for a special jewel with temporal properties, an artifact which is revealed to be sent to Gambit backwards through time by the Witness himself. Bishop at one point even refers to the Witness as Gambit to his face, a name that the Witness does not deny owning, instead simply replying by calling Bishop Mon Ami. And if you're still not happy with my anti-canonical reasoning, too bad. At number 1, we have the Rex Dogs. If you've got a problem, let me remind you that this list calls for better X-Men, and if you believe that the universe where anthropomorphic canines exist in the place of humans is somehow inferior to the X-Men, then you must be a cat person. You see, the Rex Dogs are leagues better than their human counterparts on numerous fronts. Firstly, the original X-Men are prone to fight amongst themselves, like how Wolverine and Cyclops stick together about as well as two repelling magnets, whereas the Rex Dogs take loyalty to a whole new level. In terms of combat, the X-Men are strictly known for their heroic accomplishments, while on the other hand, not only are the Rex Dogs unafraid of getting their paws dirty, they're also adorable while doing it. Guys, let's face it, it's hard not to love these mutant doggies. The only thing that the X-Men have on the Rex Dogs is opposable thumbs, which are definitely overrated. I mean, come on, Professor Rex is a disabled telepathic chihuahua, for crying out loud.